We just want to welcome you to the Box Alliance first virtual monthly webinar to showcase resources available to support aging in place. The Boxwood Alliance researches and organizes information that is useful to older adults who live in the Mid-Hudson Valley of New York, their families and their caregivers. It's a free nonprofit for 501c3 aging in place organization. And the Boxwood encourages participants to remain active and independent in their communities. When they need help, the Boxwood's website provides connections to resources, tools, research-based programs that can help older adults remain confidently in the communities they love. And people should consider volunteering as the Boxwood continues to expand its programming tools. So with that said, I'm going to introduce Heidi Weiss. Heidi is our speaker today, and she's a licensed social worker, a health advocate and educator who applies a palliative lens to the provision of support services to individuals and family members facing serious, chronic, debilitating, and life-limiting illnesses. She focuses on the impact of illness on emotional well-being, community resources, initiating complex conversations, and supportive counseling. And today she's going to talk about planning for things that matter, important conversations. So I'm gonna turn it over to Heidi, and for the moment, I'm gonna mute everybody except for Heidi. So Heidi, let me just mute everybody first, and then I will unmute you.
Workday, it's really nice to have you all here. Today's conversation, will be about conversations, important conversations. Conversations that could be challenging to get started, challenging because we don't usually talk about these kinds of conversations, but one that once you do get started can be very rewarding and very helpful throughout the trajectory of life. So as I begin, generations and generations ago, almost every illness ended in a fatality. And in the Jewish tradition, what people used to do is change the name of the person who is seriously ill, so that when the angel of death came to find them, they weren't there. Today, we use medical technology and medical interventions and treatments to do the same thing, to see how we can extend and extend and extend life, but we don't always know if that's the right choice. So there is a rabbi, her name is Rachel Naomi Riemann. She is a professor, a clinical professor at the University of California, San Francisco Medical School, who teaches a course based on her books called Kitchen Table Wisdom and the Blessings of My Grandfather. And she imparts to us the importance of choice and having choice and agency at the end of our lives and throughout our lives. So her thinking is really about not advising, not guiding, but listening. And that's the essential component of conversation. We listen to what people have to say. They listen to what we have to say. And it's in that listening that we learn things that we may never have known before. And that's what today is about, engaging in those conversations. So that's a little piece of a spiritual perspective. Now we're going to bring it to the present, to today's world. And I believe that there are almost no families who will get through life in general without somebody in their sphere who experiences a serious illness. And in that experience of serious illness, we need to come recognize what's important to that person who is ill. What's important today might not be the same as what's important a year from now or 3 years from now. So we need to learn how to engage in conversations that will allow people to make decisions that will help guide us should we be the people who have to make decisions for them. I can't see everybody because not everybody, but some of you have your screen on and I know you can hear me. Just by a show of hands, who is assigned to be someone's healthcare agent on a healthcare proxy? Who themselves has a healthcare proxy? Who has participated in the conversations that make a healthcare proxy a dynamic piece of paper as opposed to a static moment in time when you signed it? Who's had those conversations? Excellent. If I could put my thumb up icon, I would. So it's very important that we recognize that these are things that really require us to be comfortable with, because there will come a time at some point in someone's life where they will maybe have to make decisions for you, or you will have to make decisions for them. And it's not only healthcare decisions, and I think that's an important piece to include in this whole conversations aspect. There are things you'll need to know about somebody's finances. There are things you'll have to be familiar with about people's housing and housing choices. What's acceptable as caregiving? What's available for caregiving? And there will be a multitude of choices that will have to be made throughout anyone's life. So what do we do? Far from allowing ourselves or our loved ones to be deprived of what they would like for themselves or what we would wish for ourselves, the best way to prepare is by talking about it. So how do we begin some of these conversations? Or more importantly, why do we procrastinate about these conversations? Well, to begin with, we are not a culture. Americans are not of the culture to talk about death comfortably. We avoid it at all costs. And that would make this that much more challenging. So that's one piece of it. We're not familiar with it. It's not a comfortable issue for us. It's emotionally charged. Our doctors are not necessarily skilled at doing this either. It wasn't until, I'd say within the last decade, that medical students were required to take any coursework in how to have serious conversations with their patients. That's because it wasn't given to them. It was not part of the academic curriculum. So they were offered an elective, and they could choose to take it or not choose to take it, which is why some doctors maybe had a comfort level with it and some never ever practiced. So that's an important piece, that our doctors aren't necessarily comfortable with it. So how do we introduce the topic? Well, we really want a conversation that goes well beyond, you'll know when to pull the plug, because that's not helpful. We really want to have a meaningful and ongoing dialogue. What are your preferences? What are your likes? What makes something comforting to you? What are you afraid of? Are you fearing pain? And what is someone's tolerance for pain? These are all important pieces about healthcare decisions that really need to be part of that conversation for anyone who will have to make decisions for another person during a serious illness. So it means discovering all these things about a person that you may have never known before. So there are really 5 essential questions that we can begin with. The first one is, what's your understanding of the present state of your illness? What might be your fears or worries for the future? What outcomes would be acceptable to you? What outcomes are not acceptable to you? And very, very clearly, what would a good day look like for you? That's a very important question. And so we proceed with a scenario that I will share with you. Many of you may be familiar with the physician, Dr. Atul Gawande. He wrote a book, Being Mortal, whose byline is What Matters in the End. Dr. Gawande is a physician at Brigham and Women's Hospital in Massachusetts, and he is also a physician at the Dana-Farber Cancer Center in Boston. And Dr. Gawande had a very fulfilling practice. He treated people with serious illness, but he really didn't engage them in any of these kinds of conversations. He didn't recognize even his own feelings and how he would address some of these issues until his own father became ill. His father is a renowned surgeon in Boston as well, and at some point had a terrible experience with pain in his neck and some kind of shooting issue in his arm. Ultimately, he went for an MRI, and this is a surgeon. He went for an MRI, and they discovered a tumor in his father's spine that was aggressive, and it was already growing from the top center of the spinal cord up towards his neck. Well, his father was very familiar with what would be available to treat, and he wanted everything. He wanted every possible chemotherapy, radiation, whatever intervention was available, because he had decided he wanted to work until his last breath. And they did everything, and every intervention sort of had its setbacks and its progress, and its setbacks and its progress, until at some point that progress slowed down and the symptoms got much more advanced, where Dr. Gawande Sr. really couldn't practice surgery responsibly anymore. And because he was a man of integrity and dignity, he would not practice surgery knowing his hands were not functional the way they need to be for a surgeon. So his next goal was that he was determined that he was going to play tennis until he dropped dead on the tennis court. That's what he wanted. And that only happened for a certain amount of time, where his cancer was spreading down his spine now. And as it spread down his spine, his body became less functional, and he was less and less able to play tennis. Ultimately, there was no more chemotherapy to offer and fewer options. And they had, the son and father had these deep conversations, because they had the luxury of a doctor who was comfortable enough to introduce these kinds of conversations. And as it turned out, Dr. Gawande Sr. settled on being happy enough for a good day that included baseball games, doubleheader would be much better to watch, and chocolate ice cream. He said his last meal was going to be chocolate ice cream. And they were able to honor that wish. And that's because along the trajectory of any serious illness, you're going to change what becomes important. And that's why these conversations are essential to be revisited. That piece of paper, that healthcare proxy, that one may sign or ask someone to sign off on, is a static moment in time where you get the assignment to be the decision maker. The essential component, the dynamic component of that piece of paper are these conversations. So that's Dr. Gawande's story, but a really good example of how we make progress. So what could be a conversation trigger, you ask? Because it's really hard to figure out, where do I start? Well, if you're going to be the one to start the conversation, you have to do a self-check-in. How comfortable are you with with talking about some of these issues? Have you even thought about them for yourself, so that you have some idea how someone else might experience them? You could practice with a friend, or you could just keep learning and learning how to do this. There are tools we'll talk about that you can access. So for the time that you are prepared and you are ready to have this conversation, even though you maybe not have posed it as this particular conversation to the person you want to speak with, you can say, do you remember when so-and-so died? A relative, a family friend, somebody who would be known to both of you. You can start by saying, you know, I was thinking about what their experience was, and then I was thinking about what experience I might want. That some things were the same, but there are things that I think I would like differently. Can I tell you about them? So you talk about yourself, and talking about yourself could help break a barrier of what is, or what has historically been a sort of a taboo subject. So that's one way to do it. There are news features. The New York Times columnist Jane Brody often writes about conversations and how to maintain agency, maintain the power of your own decision-making by imparting your wishes to others. That's an important thing. A medical checkup is a wonderful way to have a doctor maybe say, you know, I don't see a healthcare proxy in your electronic medical record. Maybe it's time to talk about that. Sometimes there's a book. For myself, as silly as it may sound, it was an episode of Grey's Anatomy. Remember that show? I think it's still on. I don't watch it now. But there was an episode of Grey's Anatomy, a hospital scene show on TV, where one of the patients was seriously ill. A primary family member was asked about decisions that this person would want, and they didn't know. They had never talked about it. Right there, I turned to my husband and said, that's not going to be us. You're going to know and I'm going to know. So we're going to talk about this. And it was so moving to see this happening on TV. It was enough to rope him in. So if I can recommend you finding that recording, it's a good one. So that's one way, another way to do that. And talking about it is an ongoing process, but we also have to be very mindful of people's cultural and religious differences. So some people, and this is a sincere ideology, some people believe talking about things can make bad things happen. So we have to step lightly on that. If you can show someone that talking about it in regard to yourself does not make anything happen, that might help open the door. Some people just are not prepared to do this. They just can't. So you don't push it because it will not be successful. And you have to come back and find maybe a back door. And you have to recognize that once person's experience, perhaps having dealt with chemotherapy or isolation in ICU, is going to be very different than somebody who's never, ever had that experience or been exposed to anything like that. They may be much more resistant. So that's all part of scanning the field, as they say in first aid, of knowing who you're talking with. For many people, this is a conversation that takes place between adult children and their parents. Sometimes it's a conversation, like in my case, which took place first between spouses and partners. So although you may, and they may have just said to you, you know what, you're my spouse, you're my whatever, you're my doctor child, you're going to be the healthcare you're going to be the healthcare agent. When in fact, is that the right person? It doesn't need to be a spouse. It doesn't need to be an adult child doctor. It doesn't even need to be a family member. Whoever it is you're going to choose needs to give you the confidence that they will listen to you and step into your shoes and make decisions as you would have made for yourself. So that's really important to keep in mind when you're thinking about who that would be. And then, you know, rather than let them tell you, I don't want to be hooked to machines, or I want you to tell the doctor to do everything possible. That's a person who hasn't really thought about the burden versus the benefit of a particular intervention. And that's the time to ask a physician or a palliative medicine specialist to maybe help explore why that may be a burdensome decision. And that's a really important piece. But there is practical resistance. Let's face it, people don't want to talk about these things. And that's why I also introduce conversations that might be a stepping stone towards this. So if somebody has been diagnosed is with a serious illness, but is doing fairly well, but now it's time to wind down the business. Well, here's your chance to say, let's find your insurance policies, let's know your passwords, let's see how we can help you wind this down. And here you can prove yourself to be a helpful decision maker in a process. Do you know where they keep all their important papers? is their healthcare proxy on file in their electronic medical record with their doctor? People die suddenly too, and people die young. Let's understand, it's not just old people who die, get sick and die. Young people get sick and die. Young people may need surgeries. Once you're 18, you are an emancipated adult, and you decide for yourself what your decisions are, including your health care. But should you be an 18-year-old adult who, God forbid, gets hit by a car on a bike trek, you'd like to have a healthcare proxy so wherever you are, they know who to call. So you can keep wallet-sized healthcare proxies on you as well. And that's the person who you can have confidence will be able to help you make decisions because you have already shared those decisions with that person. You want to be able to make a plan if there are young children in a family and you are the sole parent and now you are compromised. You want to be able to make a will. You want to be able to do all those things that you yourself would want done for yourself. Many single elderly people have pets, and it's really important for them to know what will happen to that pet. That's part of the conversation. Sometimes that may be the easiest part of the conversation, to assure them that their pet will be safe and cared for. So in order to do these things, in order to do a comprehensive healthcare proxy completed the way you would want to complete it, which is another conversation that maybe Boxwood would allow me to come back and do, there are tools to help. There are tools, one of which is called 5 Wishes, which introduces questions that will help you engage in this conversation. And this is available online, 5wishes.com or .org. And so one of the things they introduce is, what do I want my loved ones to know? So you might want them to know about health-related issues, but you also might want them to know that you love your hobbies, and regardless of how sick you get, you want some semblance of continuation to engage in those hobbies. You love dogs. You don't own one anymore, but you want to be able to have a pet therapist come and spend time with the dog. That would be comforting. Those are the kinds of things you want to talk about. There are other tools. There is a game called the Hello Game, which is an introduction to how to engage somebody in conversations. And the questions are comfortable and they are actually graded, or paced, as you would call. There are light questions, there are medium questions, and there are certainly the more challenging questions. And those light questions are easier to sort of integrate into a conversation to build to the harder questions. That's a question like, tell your doctor, does your doctor know 3 things about you that have nothing to do with your health? That perhaps you were a book illustrator at some time in your life, that you're an amazing golfer, or perhaps that you have 10 grandchildren and 2 great-grandchildren, and those are the lives of your life. That makes you a real person to that doctor. That makes you a real person to anybody who engages with you, because you are a real person, even in illness. And that's why you want agency and choice and comfort in knowing what you want for yourself will be honored. So starting is the hardest part. There's no doubt. And once everyone gets past that awkward beginning and the discomfort, there may even be relief. You may even hear, I've been thinking about this and thinking about this, but I was afraid to bring it up to you. I didn't think you'd want to talk about it. That may not always be the response. You still may get resistance, and you may still hear, it's in God's hands, or you know me, you know what I want. It's okay, I'll be fine. Let's not even talk about it. It's all good. I've never been sick a day in my life. Well, but we don't know what tomorrow brings. And that's what we're planning for. We're planning for tomorrow. There will always be things that are out of our control, things that we didn't expect, things that we were unprepared for. And each illness will likely require different responses and different actions. And God knows we may not handle them perfectly. We're human, and it's really important to remember you're human. Things will maybe go well, and then roadblock. But you are doing your best. You are not helpless, and it is not hopeless because you have had these conversations. You are open to the process of talking. Your loved one was open to the process of talking. And despite the roadblock, you are not paralyzed. You are enabled. And you'll do what you can. And if you make a mistake, it's okay. We do. You'll know better as you make the next decision. Thank you.
Thank you so much. That was great. We really appreciate it. And we did get more people logging on while you were talking. So we got up to 16 people. So that's a good sign. And we apologize to everyone about our technical difficulties. This was our first one. So next time we are quite hopeful that we will not have this problem and everybody will be able to log on right away. I'm just going to see, and here we go with me trying to deal with the technical issues, to unmute everybody so that if anybody has any questions for Heidi, they can feel free to do it. If you are muted yourself, you need to unmute yourself if you want to ask a question.
I will ask that you raise your hand in case there's more than one question. Oh, I can't see everybody. No questions?
No questions.
Wow, that's a first for me.
Yeah. I can certainly attest to the importance of getting those healthcare proxies and getting and having that conversation when things are okay and not waiting until things are in bad shape, especially with your children even, and making sure you get those healthcare proxies once they turn 18 and go to school. I know it's not about aging, but it's a hugely important piece of information that people do not realize that they're going to need.
Right.
So I had that experience myself and I couldn't talk to anybody. So it's something you need. So I think Jillian wants to have a question.
Hi, Heidi.
Heidi, Jillian, I'm just looking for you. There you are.
Hi. Can you tell everyone about you? I know you've done so much work with difficult families. And I only say difficult in the meaning of families that need us the most. Can you tell everyone like how that went for you? And because there are a lot of clinicians on, and I know that you've mediated so many of these conversations.
So when families are resistant, what frame I often give it is, how would you feel about your loved one suffering? And suffering is not anything you want a loved one to experience. But if the burden of a treatment is too difficult, but the patient is continuing treatment because the family is rooting them, you can do it, you can do it. Not everything can be cured. And when it can't be cured, continuing to treat becomes so burdensome that it sort of takes away from the life they could live. Knowing what somebody wants is really about living till the end of life. It's not about the dying process necessarily. It's about living well and as fully as possible until the end. So when that becomes a scenario, and you can have people think about themselves, what might be comforting for you? What if the pain was unbearable? Would you still encourage your loved one to continue treatment, even though they could not participate in life? And nobody wants that for their family. So you find your door. You find your door in. If it's a family you've been working with and you know well, you'll be somewhat familiar with what the Achilles heel might be in their relationship that would allow you to start to begin to have that conversation with them. For some people, for parents, what adult child might be able to say to them is, I'm so worried about what might happen if I'm responsible for your decisions. I don't know what to do. It weighs so heavily on me. If we could talk, then maybe I would feel more empowered and I'd know what's best for you, because I'm so afraid. Can you help me? And make it about yourself. Parents don't want to be a burden, don't want their child to be suffering with this. So that might be another door. Carolyn.
Hi, Heidi.
Hi.
Thank you for a wonderful, informative presentation.
Sure.
We really appreciate it. And my question has to do with the MOLST form, which I realize could be the topic for a whole other presentation. But I wondered if you could just briefly talk about the MOLST form.
So the MOLST is an advanced directive, just like a healthcare proxy is an advanced directive. It's just another advanced directive. And that is what we call a physician-driven directive. It is you see it in patients' folders at hospitals, like on nurses' desks. It's a hot pink colored document. It's 4 sides, and it talks about this is for when you are seriously, seriously ill in your diagnosis. It's a document that allows you to take staged choices. So if you are in the last stages of an illness, and there may or may not be another possible treatment, you can check off, yes, I want that treatment. You can check off, I want a trial of that treatment. If it is not successful within a certain amount of time, you forego the continued treatment, or I do not want it. It's about treatment, it's about antibiotics, it's about artificial nutrition and hydration, which is really all that the healthcare proxy is about when it was legally decided to be the document. And that's a whole other conversation when we do healthcare proxies based upon the Medicare benefit, but that's something else. So the MOLST must be revisited every 90 days by the physician with the patient. That's why we call it a physician-driven document. The physician must sign off on that particular document every 90 days. Naomi, you have to unmute.
Okay.
There you go.
Thank you, Heidi. That was a lot of really good information. Appreciate it.
Sure.
I'm glad you brought up the 5 wishes, because I think that's a really good document, especially for those folks who don't have a good sense of what their wishes are. It allows you to be really specific. You know, who do you want to be with you? Or maybe who do you not want to be with you? You know,
Exactly.
Do you want music? Do you want somebody to put a cold compress on you? But it gives you an idea when you really have no idea of what your wishes might be.
Right.
So it helps you to organize that and put it down on paper and share it with, you know, the person or people who are going to be your healthcare proxy.
Right.
So.
And in some states, the 5 wishes may be accepted as a healthcare proxy document, just not in New York.
Right.
In New York, you need the legal document.
Right. And I think it might even list it on one of the pages, list what states that.
Right, what states? Yes, it's the back page. Yes.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Sure. Anyone else? Yes?
I was surprised. I was hesitating to bring up the subject with my children, and I was pleasantly surprised that they were relieved that I raised the subject. So
Good for you.
So
Good for them.
But we have to revisit it. We didn't go very far, and they asked some very specific questions of what I actually meant, that I didn't want any kind of long-term prolongation of anything. And it says, my daughter fired back right away. What specifically do you mean? Do you mean you don't want to ever be in a wheelchair, or even have a walker or something like that? So
Mhm.
it was a very eye-opening experience.
Right. And that's why it needs to be revisited over the course of a lifetime. Because, you know, when you're 40 and you have to be in a wheelchair, people are going to say, I'm never going to sit in a wheelchair. Well, then you're never going to go anywhere. You're never going to see anybody, that kind of thing. So, but that could be their choice, and that's okay. But they may realize, you know, 5 years later, you know, I do want to be involved in life. I want to continue living. So I need to change my mind about those things. It's very, I'm so glad that you had that opportunity. And I can't say strongly enough, the best time to have this conversation is not in a crisis. Because that could be the worst time to have the conversation.
Oh, yeah.
But do you have any advice how to now tell your children that they themselves should think about those things? Because some of them have children themselves, so that's another issue. So how do you approach that?
Well, you can say, I'm so glad that you were comfortable to have this conversation with me. Have you filled out a healthcare proxy? If they get in a car, if they walk on the street, if they had any health issue, you know, we're only as lucky, and I say lucky when we step off the curb to cross the street as the people driving, that they don't hit us, kind of thing. So you can, everybody is at risk anytime. You know, I think God watches us and keeps us, we're lucky sometimes, maybe most of the time, but any time is an important time to start talking about this, and for their children, so that their children can be safe or empowered, depending upon how old they are, if their children might be their healthcare agents.
Well, they're too young at the moment, but anyway.
Okay. Well, but that's just as it's important is to make a will for whoever might have to take on the responsibility of those children. It's as important to know if they were in a serious car accident and somebody would need to be named temporary guardians because they're so seriously injured, who's going to make those healthcare decisions for them too?
That's what worries me. I haven't convinced my son yet to work on that.
Give him my email.
This is also very important now with the COVID virus.
I know.
People are much younger and things are happening very fast. And
That's right.
it's the hugely important times to do this.
That's right.
Absolutely, I
This
agree.
is a moment.
Right.
Sure. Any other questions?
Well, thank you, Heidi. That was fabulous, and I'm so sorry we had trouble, and I'm sorry the people that missed out on it because it was great. But we recorded it,
Okay.
so we can post it once we figure out how to edit it and all that good stuff, so that we don't have all the nonsense in between. I think this is great, and I hope people will pass the word on about the upcoming events, because we have one next month, which I should have had in front of me when I said this, so I did not. We have the next one is right in front of me, if I could see it.
30th.
The 30th?
Yes, the 30th of July.
July 30th. Okay, great. Yes, we have July 30th, and next time, like I said, it will be a little bit more organized because it will be in a webinar format. And we look forward to having everyone here. And since a lot of you are professionals here, please, you know, share the information on your social media and get the word out, because, you know, these are all going to be really informative topics, and we'd love for people to have the opportunity to hear the information. So
What's the topic for next time?
it is, do you want to, somebody want to chime in? Because for some reason I'm having trouble.
Yes, it's going to be know the 10 signs of Alzheimer's dementia.